Hey guys, welcome back to another new Friday video. Now, I know I look weird. There's a reason. I am a pussy. Sorry, Mom. I'm gonna flash up a picture here if it works. And if it does, you'll see it. I'm gonna have this on for the entire video, so it can just... One thing I do want to mention is that I have a gaming channel that is releasing February 2nd. 2026. If you want to go ahead and just go subscribe to it, feel free to. It is strictly horror games. There will be a trailer up for it soon. Well, not soon. There will be a opening trailer to the channel, and it's going to come out January 1st of 2026. So that is a whole month before the channel releases. So yeah, I will leave the link in the description if you want to go ahead and go subscribe to it. But yeah, enough talking. This intro is already long enough, so let's just get right into the Greyhound bus incident. It's in the same year that I was born, 2008. But let's get right into it. Let's start with the victim, Tim McLean. So Tim McLean was born on October 3rd, 1985 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He grew up in Winnipeg and Ely, Manitoba. He was 22 years old at the time of his death and had been working as a carnival worker, especially a carnival baker in Edmonton, Alberta. On December 21st, 2008, just 5 months after McLean's death, his girlfriend Colleen Yestra would give birth to his son. In 2009, a custody dispute between Yestra and McLean's parents over guardianship of the boy would begin. The boy began living with the McLean family in January 2015. In February 2016, the family, McLean, would win full custody of the boy. McLean's mother has described her grandson as a gift from God sent by my son to give me a reason to get up every day and to take care of. Due to disputes with the agency supervising visits and McLean's separation from her husband, the boy has remained with McLean's mother, and neither Yestra or Timothy McLean Sr. have seen him since 2018 and 2016, respectively. Now, let's move on to the criminal, Vince Lee. Vince Lee was born in Dang Don on April 30th, 1968, as the second of 3 children. Lee's father was a custodian while his mother was a math teacher. He was born 1 month premature, and it was noted by psychiatrists in his youth that Lee was very sickly throughout most of his childhood and exhibited development delays, learning to walk and talk only at around 5 years old and starting elementary school at age 9. Nevertheless, his health and academic progress would improve upon entering high school. At age 19, Lee began studying automotive engineering at the Wuhan Institute of Technology, from which he graduated with a bachelor's degree in computing in 1992. From 1994 to 1998, Lee worked in Beijing as a computer software engineer, and this is where he would meet his future wife. According to Lee's wife and family, he displayed no signs of mental illness, although his father noted that his son was stubborn and restless, and had a tendency for always moving around. Lee immigrated to Canada on June 11, 2001, although some newspapers have mistakenly reported 2004 as part of the Federal Skilled Worker Program and remained a Chinese national until he became a Canadian citizen on November 7, 2006. Starting in the fall of 2004, he worked in Winnipeg at menial jobs at Grant Memorial Church for 6 months to support his wife, Anna. Pastor Tom Castor, who employed Lee, said he seemed happy to have a job and was committed to doing it well. Despite a language barrier with other congregation members, I think he would occasionally feel frustrated with not being able to communicate or understand. Castor told CTV Winnipeg, but we have very patient staff members and he seemed to respond well. Castor also said Lee did not show any signs of anger issues or any other trouble before he quit in the spring of 2005. He began working as a forklift operator in Winnipeg that same year's summer while his wife worked as a waitress. According to Stanley Yaron, his court psychiatrist, Lee told him that he had converted to Christianity and was baptized during his employment at Grant Memorial Church after he heard the voice of God talking to him. Lee said that the voice called him the third story of the Bible, as well as the second coming of Jesus, destined to save people from an alien invasion. In preparation, the voice would regularly order Lee to travel through the country on foot or by bus, often disappearing from his home for days on end, as corroborated by his wife. Due to his paranoid belief that he was constantly under threat by alien infiltrators, Lee began carrying a buck knife on his person for protection. And this is the same knife that he used to kill McLean. His delusions would later be ascribed to undiagnosed schizophrenia. Lee's wife recalled that he often went several days without sleeping or eating and often spent his days at home and telling her about his visions of God. She and many of Lee's friends attempted to get Lee to visit a doctor for his auditory hallucinations, but of course he would refuse due to the fear of hospital. The couple subsequently separated in March of 2005, leading Lee to leave for Thompson, initially planning to buy land. But after realizing that he had no money, he began working as an overnight maintenance worker at a local Walmart. 4 months later, Lee saved up enough money to move back to Winnipeg, where he briefly worked as a gas station attendant for Domo and part-time at Tim Hortons. Lee says it was during this time that he suffered his first full-blown mental breakdown. In September of 2005, the voice in Lee's head convinced him to abandon everything to head for Toronto as it was easier to find work there. After failing to do so, the voice told Lee to go back to Winnipeg on foot, discarding of his luggage by a roadside. He was later found by Ontario Provincial Police wandering Highway 427, malnourished and dehydrated, stating that he was following the sun at the command of God. He was examined at William Osler Health Center, and despite some local newspapers reporting that Lee was diagnosed with schizophrenia by staff there and had refused medication, official reports show that Lee was never documented for mental illness, though it had been noted at Lee's trial that his maternal uncle suffered from an unspecified psychiatric disorder. After Lee checked himself out of the clinic against the advice of doctors who wanted him to stay for a month for continued observation, he called his wife and asked her to book him a flight back to Dandong. There, his parents noticed their son's change in personality, and that although Lee found work easily, he was unable to stay unemployed for longer than a few days due to his sudden irritability. Lee's wife joined her husband shortly after, and they tried to reconcile, but they ended up divorcing when she saw that Lee's mental faculties had only worsened since the separation. Lee would move back to Canada and settle in Toronto where he was unemployed. He called his ex-wife regularly, telling her he missed her and was unable to work. She allowed Lee to live with her in Winnipeg until he was able to live by himself again. But less than a year later, Lee left his ex-wife again when he abruptly relocated to Edmonton. For a while, Lee lived in his car after again failing to find a job. His ex-wife continued to send him money, and in July of 2007, she moved in with Lee, with the relationship improving in the following months. From then on, his jobs included work as a janitor, mechanic, and a cashier at a Walmart, service at a McDonald's restaurant, and newspaper delivery. His delivery boss, Vincent Augert, described Lee as reliable, hardworking, and not showing any signs of trouble. Lee's ex-wife said that he appeared happy for the first time since his hallucinations began. In June of 2008, Lee's mental health deteriorated rapidly. He flew back to China on a whim to see his family, but only stayed for 1 day before returning, telling his father that he had just come to find a wife. 4 weeks before the killing, Lee was fired from Walmart following a disagreement with another employee. Shortly before the incident, he asked for time off from his delivery job to go to Winnipeg for a job interview. On the 24th of July, Lee left the home he shared with his ex-wife, leaving a note reading, "Don't look for me. I wish you were happy," as Lee had frequently left her and returned without notice during their marriage. So she wasn't worried about this until Lee had called her on the 26th, just 2 days later, clarifying that he would not be coming back. And 3 days after this call, at approximately 12:05 p.m. on the 28th of July in Edmonton, Lee boarded the Greyhound bus bound for Winnipeg. On July 29th, around an estimated time of 6 p.m., Lee got off the bus in Erickson, Manitoba, with at least 3 pieces of luggage and stayed the night on a bench next to a grocery store. According to one of the witnesses, he was seen at 3 a.m. sitting bolt upright with his eyes wide open. On the morning of July 30th, still at the bench, he sold his new laptop computer to a 15-year-old boy for how much? $60. The laptop was seized by the RCMP as evidence. It contained over 20 individual resumes applying for jobs in different fields, including convenience stores, fast food restaurants, IT departments, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, though it has not been specified which position he was applying for. There were also several images, such as body shots of female models, pictures of military parades by the People's Liberation Army, and photos taken by Lee himself, including various mountains in British Columbia, as well as multiple angle shots of a BAE CT-155 Hawk mid-flight, the latter 2 of which are assumed to have been made during his travels across Canada while undergoing schizophrenic episodes. There is also an undated and unsent message addressed to either a family member or friend in China, in which Lee commented on how he enjoys living in Canada, but states that he misses home and that Canada was not as he expected. Now, finally, the moment that you guys have been waiting on, let's get into the brutal killing of Tim McLean. On July 30th, 2008, Tim McLean boarded Greyhound bus 1170 bound for Winnipeg, Canada. The 22-year-old carnival baker had just finished working at an affair in Alberta and was returning home for the off-season. Just before 6 p.m., 40-year-old Vince Lee boarded the bus in Erickson, Manitoba. He initially sat in the front of the bus, but after a subsequent rest stop in Brandon at 7 p.m., Lee made his way to the back and took the seat directly next to Tim McLean. McLean was leaning against the window with his headphones on, so he didn't even notice when Lee pulled out a large knife. Even though Lee had never spoken a word to this man, he began viciously stabbing him in the neck, chest, and torso. As the other 35 passengers realized what was going on, panic ensued. Stephen Allison, who was sitting directly across from Lee and McLean, heard a scream and looked over to see the knife plunging into McLean's neck. He yelled at the driver to pull over and everyone rushed off the bus. Bernie Suckrup was driving a second bus just behind the Greyhound. When he saw the vehicle stop on the side of the road, he pulled over as well and he stepped aboard the bus 1170 to see what was happening. The young man was probably gone long before I got there, Bernie would tell the Globe and Mail in 2009. I was right there. I did everything I could. A truck driver, Chris Augier, I'm sorry if I said your last name wrong, was also passing by the scene, and he stopped to see if he could help. When he heard someone was being stabbed, he grabbed a weapon and stood outside the doors of the bus so that Lee could not escape. I was ready to break every bone in his body, Chris told the Globe and Mail. For the next 4 hours, the horrified, terrified, petrified passengers watched the carnage unfold inside the bus. After killing Tim McLean, Lee decapitated him and displayed his severed head through the window. He also began slicing off pieces of the young man's body. By 9 p.m., the police had arrived and were in a standoff with Vince Lee. According to the Winnipeg Free Press, Lee muttered that he had to stay on this bus forever and refused to get off. This lasted for several hours, but around 1 a.m., Vince Lee tried to jump through a broken window to escape, and officers would detain him and boarded the Greyhound to investigate. What they would find would haunt them forever. Lee had McLean's ears, tongue, and nose in his pockets. Other body parts were scattered across the bus, but investigators would never find his eyes or even parts of his heart, and they believe that Lee ate them. Hey, so, this is like not an update, but more information on this entire true crime case. I found the website while I was editing, so I'm not gonna read the entire thing, but I will read the stuff that I did miss. Garnett Catton, a seismic driller who sat one row ahead of McLean, described hearing a blood-curdling scream. I turned around and the guy sitting right behind me was standing up and stabbing another guy with a big Rambo knife right in the throat, repeatedly. Another passenger, which we did mention, Stephen Allison, stated that McLean fought his attacker, which gave the other passengers time to get off the bus. The bus driver and 2 other men tried to come to McLean's rescue, but was chased away by Lee, who was slashing wildly with his knife. A police officer who had arrived at the scene saw Lee cut off body parts from the victim's body and eat them. After the bus driver's failed intervention, Lee had gone back to the body to sever other parts and consume some of McLean's flesh. And something that is even more baffling than this entire thing somehow is that the fact that law officers who had arrived at the scene did not stop Lee. They allowed him to continue doing what he was doing in plain sight of other passengers. Vince Lee was obviously mentally ill and was under the impression during the attack that he was chosen by God to save people from an alien. He had been hearing voices for a while and was obviously not sane enough to realize that he was afflicted with schizophrenia. During the attack, witness Garnett, which we did mention earlier, said that Lee was in his own world, not enraged, but more like a robot. When Lee appeared on charges of second-degree murder, the only words he uttered were pleas for someone to kill him. Another website that I have also seen, we do know a reason as to why Vince Lee decided to murder McLean, and here it is. Vince Lee's life was in disarray due to severe mental illness. Later, Lee claimed he heard the voice of God. It was this divine voice, Lee claimed, that instructed him to kill Timothy McLean to prevent McLean from killing him first. The voice told me that I was the third story of the Bible, that I was like the second coming of Jesus, and that I was to save people from a space alien attack. Tim McLean was sleeping against the bus window when Vince Lee pulled out a knife and began, because the voice of God purportedly told him the 22-year-old stranger, which he had never spoken a word to, was a force of evil and an alien who needed to be destroyed. Vince Lee has been sent to a high-security mental health center in Manitoba, and after a year, he was allowed to walk outside on the grounds with supervision, and in May of 2011, he was deemed a model patient. By May 2012, Lee had earned supervised visits to the nearby town of Selkirk. Over the next 5 years, Lee's privileges were expanded further, and by 2015, he was granted an absolute discharge from the facility. He was no longer considered to be a safety threat to the public, and Vince Lee has since changed his name to Will Baker. Today, he lives as a free man. And that is going to do it. He could definitely do this again, but what are your thoughts on this? Should he be a free man as he is right now, or should he be put back into jail? And should he be identified as a threat to society? But I want to know what you guys think, so let me know in the comment section down below. And if you have any other suggestions of what I should talk about next, please put them in the comments down below, because I'm running out. And I want to see what you guys are into, what you guys want to see more of. Yeah, give me some feedback. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If I earned your subscription, make sure to subscribe. We are on our way to 150 subscribers, either before my birthday, which is September 30th, or by the end of the year. Like, if you actually like this video, make sure to leave a like. Alright, thank you guys so much for dealing with this weird thing that's going on. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I will catch you all in my next video.